Hello there. I'm John Davison. Wait a second. There's one. I like to hunt unicorns. I bet you like to hunt unicorns too. Except in Startup Landia, the world of high stakes startups and adventures, we don't necessarily hunt unicorns with a bow and arrow. We hunt unicorns with web software. And what I'm going to do in this session is teach you how to implement get, post, put, and delete with Ruby Sinatra. If you'll take a look over here in this web browser that I'm going to maximize, we just have a bunch of nothingness, and I'm going to demonstrate some software that we're going to build here momentarily. So I like this spriggly wiggly idea, right? We can talk about that later. Why? Anyways, let's go ahead and create a new restaurant, right? We will call this place John's Happy Place in the Tender Knob, which is where I live. We'll create that restaurant, and let's give this restaurant an order. Waffles and fries. Let's create that order. Oh, look, there we go. Actually, you know what? I don't want waffles and fries. I want waffles and bacon. Let's edit that order. And yeah, I don't actually like the name. Let's see. Let's edit the name of the restaurant because I don't like John's Happy Place. So we'll call this the Cruffin House in the Tender Knob. And we will edit that. And here we are. Let's get rid of this restaurant by deleting it, by clicking on the button and creating a new one. We'll call this the, we'll call it the Tender Knob Express in Knob Hill. We'll make it fancier. And there we go. So yes, in the remaining section of this video, we're going to go ahead and dig through the why and how of what I had to program to get this web interface to do these things. Okay, let's continue building out our web application. So here I am in my home directory in my terminal. Let's go into the unicorn hunting directory. Actually, let's go back to the home directory and verify where we are. And I have a directory called unicorn hunting. If you don't have a directory, look, I can remove. Let's make another directory. Make dir other unicorn dir. Right? cd other unicorn dir, right? There we go. There's nothing inside of it. So here we are. Let's go ahead and clone the source code for this application. Git clone. And let's look at what we've got. There we are. We have fundamentals of web programming. Also enter into the spriggly wiggly directory. Once you are inside the spriggly wiggly directory, let's type bundle install. Okay, all of our gems are installed. Let's go ahead and open the entire code base in Atom by typing Atom and then pass Atom a little period as an argument. And hopefully Atom will open up for you. You might notice that we have a directory called building blocks, we have a directory called HTML, a public directory, and a couple files over here. We're going to be working primarily with the spriggly wiggly web app file. If you open that, you'll notice there's really nothing in that file, which is as I intended it. I just want to basically allow you to have a little bit of structure built around your web app, and I'm going to show you how to populate that structure with information that's relevant. Let's go into our console over here, and on a Mac keyboard I'm going to push Command I, and I'm actually going to go ahead and give this tab a title. I'm going to call it Server, push Enter, and then Command W to close that window. Let's go back into Chrome, and let's actually run the web server, bundle exec rerun Ruby spriggly wiggly web app.rb. Make sure you get the tick marks around the Ruby command, and basically you don't necessarily need to dig too deeply into these commands, but as you progress as a programmer they will become much clearer. Bundle exec is a command that enforces a certain kind of Ruby dependency to be run, right? Only dependencies defined in our gem file in the current project directory can be run. And rerun is a command that will allow our web server to continually restart itself every time we update the code for the web server, which is very useful when we're trying to develop something. So let's push enter and go ahead and run that. And you'll notice that we get all the feedback that says a Sinatra app is running and it is listening to port 5000, right? So let's go ahead and visit port 5000 in a web browser, localhost colon port 5000, and we run a request. We make a request to the root, and there's nothing there. So that's pretty much as I would expect it. And we're basically going to be building this app from the ground up. So the first thing we want to do is build the restaurant and order object models, as is highlighted right there. Let's go into our code in Atom. And one thing I want you to be aware of is this building blocks directory, right? Inside the building blocks directory, there are a bunch of different files that have different types of code that we're going to need to build this application. So like I've seen a lot of tutorials where a lot of people spend a lot of time like typing, and frankly, at the beginning side of your life as a programmer, a lot of people are not sensitive to the problems that typos create. So for learning purposes, particularly just to kind of conceptually look at what's going on inside the code, I've actually given a lot of code snippets so that you don't necessarily have to be typing everything, right? Like some people, when you're learning, will be like, yeah, type everything, it'll make you a better programmer. Yes, typing everything will make you a better programmer, but it will also probably make you have more mistakes. So for now, it's okay to just kind of cut and paste. So I'm going to Command C, copy that, and I'm going to open up Spriggly Wiggly webapp.rb, and let's go ahead and paste in our database setup information, right? And if you're curious what this database setup information does, it basically is telling our Sinatra application that it has access to a database called sprigglywiggly.db, and inside that database are going to be two things: restaurant objects and order objects. And if you're familiar with databases or Excel, basically restaurant and order Ruby classes will give us the opportunity to act with that same record in the database. So let's save that, and you'll notice that the web app has restarted itself, right? Let's go back and look at the tutorial, because there's something really useful in here that I want you to see, and that's these IRB commands. So we're going to verify that we set up our database properly by opening another terminal, Command T. Let's title this CLI, Command W to shut that window, and then let's run this IRB-R .sprigglywigglywebapp.rb. We're basically requiring our application file in IRB. Excuse me. Now that we have required our web app file in IRB, let's just go ahead and type restaurant.new, right? And you see we get this little object, and basically what you should really be queuing into right now is that our IRB session knows about our Ruby classes, restaurant and order. And as I've written here in the blog post, let's go ahead and make a few orders. So let's do something, orders and restaurants. Let's do restaurant.create, and we need to give this restaurant a name. We'll call it John's Happy Place, and we'll give it a location, Tender Knob, which is the district that I live in San Francisco. Push enter, and now if I type restaurant with a capital R, restaurant.last, we'll actually see the last restaurant created in the database. And now let's create a new order, and we'll say this order has a description of fries with bacon, and we need to tell the restaurant, we need to tell the object that it is related to the restaurant we just created. So we're going to save this new record with the restaurant ID of 17, right? And let's see if we do something like order.last. Now you'll see that we have order number 26. You might get slightly different numbers for the IDs of your records, but everything should effectively work the same. Now, interestingly enough, we can call something like restaurant.last, and then we can actually call .orders, and the object relational mapper will make a query into the database, and it will return us all of the orders associated with the last restaurant in the database, which is also something like restaurant.get 17. And we can do that same call, .orders, right? So that's going to be super useful. It lets us know that our database is working properly. I'm going to drink some coffee real quick. Okay, moving right along. Let's implement the root of our application, because if we visit our root, and let's switch over and look at our server, if we visit the root, here I'll clear out my terminal window by pushing Command K. I haven't canceled the program, I've just cleared out the feedback in the terminal, and if I make another request to the root of the application, so we still don't really have an application. So let's go ahead and build out the root of our application. And here we are in our web app, and let's go into the get requests building blocks file, and let's just grab this root endpoint. And we're going to want to build in our file sequentially, because since a program executes, generally speaking, top to bottom, left to right, we're going to want all this data mapper and database code to run before any of our web application endpoint code runs. And so basically, if we make a GET request to the root, we're going to run these two lines of code. We're going to make a database call to restaurants.all, right, which is going to give us all the restaurants in the database. And then we're going to pass that variable to a template file, index.html, which I have actually built for you. It's called index.erb, not index.html. But effectively, the contents of this ERB file will be first interpreted as Ruby and then interpreted as HTML, and it'll be sent to the web browser. And so we actually, let's save this, and then let's refresh our web server. And you'll see that we have this content, but we don't actually have any of our restaurant objects showing up. So let's go back into our index.erb file, and let's actually render some restaurant objects. And if you open up render restaurants.erb, you'll notice we have a snippet that will allow us to take the restaurants variable, iterate on that variable, and then render a bunch of HTML for each restaurant inside of our database. So let's go ahead and copy this code, and let's add it to index.erb. And you can push Command T to get your fuzzy search tool to come up, index.erb. And we can literally just add this ERB embedded Ruby code to the file as I have just done. Let's put that H4 on a new line, and let's go ahead and save that, and let's refresh our application. Okay, notice now we have our restaurant objects rendering the same IDs that correspond to the queries we were making in our IRB console over here, right? That looks good. So let's keep moving through our application and our tutorial. So we want to add some styles so that things look better, because this doesn't look great. So what do we see? We see some CSS. Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to add some CSS inside this Spriggly Wiggly style.css file. So here we have styles.css. Let's copy all that. And if we open up our public CSS directory and we look at sprigglywiggly if we paste that in there and we save that, you should see the server restart itself. And if I refresh my page, we should now see some styles, right? We've added some colors and we've added some centering and just make it a little bit easier to look at, right? Okay, so what's next on our list? Implement post/restaurants. What posting to the restaurant's endpoint will allow us to do is actually create a new restaurant record in the database, but we will be doing that from an HTML browser. Excuse me, we'll be doing it from a web browser that's rendering HTML. So the first thing we have here, we're going to render the new restaurant form. Okay, so let's grab this endpoint, which is, as I mentioned before, it's the same endpoint in our get requests and inside of all of the building blocks. So what we want to do is, okay, let's actually talk about why we want to do that. So here we have this link. You notice that points to /restaurant/create. And if I click that link, a request was made to the server right over here. You can see, right, a get was made to restaurant/create. And our web server doesn't know what to do with that because we haven't actually programmed that. So let's copy that endpoint and let's go back to the Spriggly Wiggly main application. Let's paste that in. Let's save that. And what's going to happen when somebody makes a request to restaurant/create, our web application is basically going to render a template create_restaurant. And let's see what lives inside create_restaurant. Right now, there's really not much inside create_restaurant, but anyways, if we refresh the browser, at least we now see the page. What we need to do is add a form to this page, and if we go back to our render restaurants building block page, we should see a form that can create a new restaurant. Let's grab this line and let's go back into, we were in, I believe, create restaurant.erb. Yep. Here we go, and let's add this form, right? And the really important thing to know in a form is the action, right? Where is this form going to submit to? And the method, which is a proxy for the HTTP action. And so what we want to do is create these input fields, right, that have name and location that will create an object that gets submitted to our server as a post request to /restaurants, right? And now let's refresh our browser and boom, now you'll see that we have a form, name and location. So if we type in a name, we'll call it Slybar, and the location is the mission. If I push create new restaurant, we're going to send a post request to the server. But if you look and you're kind of thinking ahead and you think about what's inside Spriggly Wiggly web app, we don't actually have any server endpoints that would allow our server to know what to do with a post request. So we're actually going to go ahead and post this, and we're going to get an error from the server, right? Right? We got an error, and you look, we made a post, and our server is like, hey, we don't know what to do with this, right? So yeah, let's just go back and go into our post requests building block, and look, we have an endpoint that will allow us to post to /restaurants, right? Which is the same place, post/restaurants, that our form will be submitting to, right? So it's like the sticky part in a lot of web software is understanding that like the browser and the server don't really live together. What connects them is the way that web forms submit to servers, right? Because once a server sends information to a browser, the browser no longer has any connection to that server until you tell the browser to do something again. And in this case, we told our browser, right? I'm going to go back. We told our browser to create a new restaurant which sent a post request to the server. So let's go ahead and add our create restaurant endpoint to the web application. push enter a few times, give yourself some space, save that, right? So now what is going to happen when the server receives a post request to /restaurants is going to run all this code right here, right? And basically we're going to create a new restaurant. We're going to instantiate a variable that is an instantiation of a restaurant, right? This might not make sense. It's not super important. Just kind of try to work through it and see how things are connected. And we're going to set the name and location of that object, and then we're going to save it. And when we save the object, then Ruby will transmit that information to the database, and then we're going to redirect the user back to the root of the application, which is then going to query for all the restaurants, which is what will enable us to display restaurants in the web browser. Okay, so I saved the web app, Sinatra restarted itself, and now I am going to submit this restaurant again, right? And so now this time, if you notice, we posted to restaurants, and actually our code ran just as we would have expected it to run, and we have a new restaurant created, number 18, right? Okay, so now we have posted to /restaurants. Let's keep going. So here we have this put /restaurants, right? HTTP put is what enables us to edit a record in our database. And so what we're going to do is we're going to enable this endpoint get restaurants /ID/edit, which will allow us to render a restaurant object, right? It'll allow us to kind of send some information back to the web client that allows us to interact with the information that we cared about. So let's go ahead and build this endpoint. Right, so we're going to whoops, what did I do? Anyways, post to restaurants, and let's go into our put requests directory and grab put / no, this is not what we want. We want to make a get, because first thing we want to do is render our restaurant object into the browser. So restaurants /ID/edit, let's dial this in. Let's save that. And our server restarted itself, and it looks like we also want to enable visiting that link in the browser. So if you look inside the render restaurants template file, we have this link that will allow us to visit a restaurant. And let's go ahead and go back to index, which is our page that renders our restaurants, and let's actually give our restaurant the ability to click a link that allows the restaurant to be edited. So let's go ahead and place this link. Let's place it after this paragraph. So we'll just place that link in there like that, save that, and you'll notice that we have access to our restaurant object, and we'll be interpolating the ID of our restaurant object into this hyperlink. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser. Notice we now have a edit restaurant link, and maybe we could make this centered. Class equals centered. Save that. Just push refresh again. And the centering didn't work, but that doesn't matter in this moment. Oh, the centering didn't work because we have a P inside of a div, and it's not set up properly. Anyways, we're not going to worry about that too much. What we want to look at is if you hover over the link, notice that the underlying link, restaurants /16/edit, is going to route us to our page, restaurant 16/edit. And we got an error, which is good. It's because we just don't have a file for edit restaurant. Let's go into our code and look at the Spriggly Wiggly web app, and we're looking for we're looking for a template, edit restaurant, right? And we have an edit restaurant template, but for some reason we didn't necessarily like what we got. Runtime error at restaurants. Template engine not found. Edit restaurant. Oh yeah, because render is not the right command to give. I need to give the command ERB restaurants. Let's go ahead and save that. Notice that our server restarted, and if we refresh, we should see this empty template page. And what we want to do is open that empty template page, edit restaurant, and notice there's nothing in this edit restaurant template page. So let's go grab a form that will allow us to capture some information about our restaurant object, and it will allow us to edit it. So let's go into our render restaurants, and let's look at this form that can edit an existing restaurant. And let's add that into our edit restaurant page, paste that in, save that, and now if you refresh your browser, notice that we now have the value of restaurant with ID number 16 being rendered in our page, right? And if we were to go back into our terminal and we look at restaurant.get16, right, we can see that the information being displayed in the web browser is the same information that lives in the database. And a really important topic to consider is that in the browser, you're not actually seeing the actual database record. You're just seeing the value of the database record, right? Like we're just like saying we're writing that information in the browser. We're not actually transferring or connecting the database to the web client. It's a very kind of subtle idea that can be a little bit tricky to explain in certain situations, but just keep working through these tutorials, and as time goes by, a lot of these little subtle details will become more clear. Okay, and so here we are. We actually want to update the value of our restaurant name, and so let's say that instead of Nob Hill, we are going to put this restaurant by Union Square, because that's a very famous part of San Francisco. And now when I click edit the restaurant, we're going to get an error because our server doesn't know what to do with this new information, right? So it looks like a put request was made to restaurants/16, which we haven't told our server what to do with that. So let's go into put requests, and here we have a command that will, or excuse me, not a command, but a snippet put restaurant/ID that will allow us basically to grab the restaurant information from the database, update it, and then save some new information to the database. Then we're going to send our user back to the root. Let's go ahead and copy that, and let's write that into our web app. And let's go back in the browser. And now I'm literally just going to push edit restaurant again, and now our server knows what to do. You notice that the Tenderknob Express is now in Union Square, and if we click edit again, we could actually change the name as well. So let's change it to the Union Square Hoo-Ha, and we'll put it in Union Square, except capitalize Union Square. And notice that we updated our web server and we got some requests made to our web server. Okay, so what comes next? We want to be able to delete a restaurant, right? Okay, so deleting a restaurant is basically about implementing a small form that sends the value of the restaurant ID to the server. The server grabs that information and is like, hey, you just told me to delete something. So let's go into our delete requests snippet building block, and let's grab the code to delete a restaurant, and then let's go ahead and tell our web server what to do. Save that. The web server should restart itself. And let's also grab the code that will allow us to delete our restaurant, right? We're basically going to create a form that has a hidden value of delete, because web browsers only know how to make get and post requests. So basically what we're going to be doing is making a post request and giving our post request extra information that our server is going to interpret and be like, oh yeah, this isn't just a post request. The server will interpret this request as a delete request, and we will be telling the server what record to be deleting. And let's go ahead and add this form to our index.erb file. Let's close create restaurant and edit restaurant, and let's close the style sheet. And here we are inside of our index.erb file, and let's say we just want to, we'll make that the first element in our HTML. Let's refresh that, and look, we get a little X that will allow us to create a delete request to, let's inspect this actually. And look, it's going to make a delete request to restaurant/16. So let's click that, and hopefully we'll actually get a deleted restaurant. Okay, that worked. And you see that we got a delete request made to restaurant 16 over here in our console. And if we check our web application code, all we did was grab the ID from the params. We grab the ID of our restaurant, and we make a request to the database, and then we destroy that restaurant, which we could also do in our terminal. Look, we could do something like restaurant.last, so we know that number 18 is our restaurant. Let's do restaurant.get18.destroy, right? And notice we have restaurant number 18 in our browser right here, but I'm going to destroy it in the database. Boom. And now I'm going to refresh our web application, and restaurant 18 is going to be gone, right? Hope that was clear. Okay, so we've done the basics for the restaurant: get, post, put, and delete on a restaurant, create, read, update, and destroy. Let's now render a restaurant's orders. So we're going to be working primarily from the render orders, and let's just go ahead and grab this snippet, restaurant.orders.each, and go back into our index file. Whoops. I closed our index file, Command T, open index back up again, and let's go ahead and paste that snippet inside of our restaurant ID block, and let's save that, and let's show off our console, and let's refresh our page. I'm going to zoom out a little bit to give us a little bit more screen size, and you'll see now we are rendering order number 26 for restaurant ID number 17. And if we were to create another order, order.create, and we'll say the description is sushi, and the restaurant ID is 17. Now, if we refresh the browser, notice that we now have 2 orders being displayed, right? And the code responsible for that was basically our call to restaurant.orders, and we're iterating on each order, and we're rendering an H4 for every single order that exists for this restaurant in the database. Okay, so what else is on our list? So here we go, render a restaurant's orders. Implement post/orders. This will allow us to create new orders. And what we're going to want to do is grab the code that will allow us to create a new order, right? We're going to make a post request to /orders. And all we're going to do is post the description, and we're going to send in a hidden input field that actually allows us to set the ID of the restaurant, which is going to be really useful. Let's go back into index.erb, and inside of our restaurant.orders, let's go ahead and create a new order for this restaurant. And let's save this, and let's refresh our page. And look, we can create a new order. And I'm going to say I want pancakes, and I'm going to push create order, and I think we're going to get an error because we haven't told the server what to do yet when it receives a post request to /orders, right? Okay, so let's go in and look at our post request building block. Create a new order. So pretty straightforward. We're going to post to orders. We're going to instantiate a new order object. We're going to set the value of the description in the restaurant ID to the value of the params object description and params restaurant ID. Then we're going to save our object and send the user back to the beginning. You may be asking yourself, what is this params object? Params is the information contained in the form and other information sent from the browser to the server. So let's go back to our web app and let's add this endpoint, and let's just print out the value of our params object, and we can look at that in the console. And there we go, we saved that. You see the web server restarted itself, and let's go back in our browser and push create order button again, and let's look at the console. And look, we created our pancakes order, and if you look down in our console at this object right here, this description pancakes restaurant ID, we have this params object that we were able to access inside our web server that has some information that came from the web browser and is what allows us to run these 2 particular lines right here, right? We are setting the value in the database to the value of the information sent from the client to the server. Okay, so let's keep going. Now let's go ahead and implement put/orders. And what this will allow us to do is actually update one of our order records. And so the first thing that we need to do is create a server endpoint that will allow our server to render an order object, the value of an order object from the database into the web browser so that we can actually edit and interact with that information. So let's go into our get requests building block file and grab the endpoint that will allow our server to render the value of an order to the client. And let's go ahead and give our web server that code. And so we don't necessarily have a way to access this server endpoint. So let's actually open up the render orders building block, and let's grab this link where we're going to be creating a hyperlink, and we're going to be dynamically inserting information into that hyperlink that will allow us to visit our orders edit page. let's go back into index.erb and let's place the value of that link inside of our H4 that has our order. And let's go ahead and save that. And then let's refresh our web server and let's refresh our page. And you'll notice now we have these little edit order buttons for each of our individual H4s saved. And if we inspect one of these, we can see that the value of the hyperlink is /orders/26/edit. So we'll basically be clicking on that and we will visit our edit order page, which is empty. Let's go ahead and visit that page, and there should be mostly nothing there, right, as we would expect it. And let's create a form that will allow us to render the order ID, right? This order will correspond to the order ID that we're requesting, 26, right, which is governed by our endpoint, right? Our server endpoint basically will use the value of the param sent in, right, which in this case is ID, and it will query to the database for that order, and then we're going to render this edit order template page back to the browser, and we're going to give our page this form. Here we are in edit order.rb. Let's paste that form in there, save that, and then let's go visit our web server, refresh this page, and notice we now have the value of order number 26. The description of the order is populating into our form as we would expect, right? Look at our form and our input, our text field, we're actually writing the value of the order.description. We're using string interpolation in ERB right here, and we're writing that all in. Okay, so let's say that instead of fries with bacon, I want a salad. And I want a salad, and we click edit order, we're going to get an error, right? Because we haven't necessarily told our server what to do with the put request, which is really the meat of this situation, right? And so to update an order, we actually have to tell our web server that, hey, when somebody makes a put request to /orders and they give a dynamic ID, which is what you will see down in our console over here, put orders 26, right? We need to tell our web server to do something. And so let's go ahead and paste in this server endpoint, put orders :ID, and remember this :ID part, right? This will be available to us inside of our server endpoint as our params ID, using ID as the key to look up in the params hash, right? So on and so forth. And we're going to set the value of the description of that record in the database to whatever new information is contained in our params, and we're going to save it, and then we're going to send the user back to the root. So I'm going to save that. You should see the web server update itself, restart itself and update. And now I'm going to go back in my browser. And now when I click edit order, I expect order number 26 to have a new description, and that description is salad, right? And order number 26 has a new description of salad. And if we were to click edit again, I hate salad, so actually I want a plate of ribs, right? Order number 26, here we go, right? Order number 26, plate of ribs, there we go. Okay, and so what do we have left to do? We want to implement delete orders /ID, right? This will allow us to dynamically delete any particular order that we care about. So let's go into our render orders building block page, and let's go ahead and grab this form, right? Some important things to be noticing are that we are deleting to a particular orders endpoint, and we are setting a hidden value of the order ID, and which will be available in our params. And because browsers can only create GET and POST requests, we'll be creating a POST request, but we'll be adding information to our POST request, which is our delete information, right? And then let's grab this form in snippet and go back into index.erb. And again, we're going to want to render this inside our orders tag. And so let's save that. Excuse me, we're not really in our orders tag, but this H4 is what's creating our order. And all of this code right here can be considered a node. We don't necessarily need to get that detailed though. Let's go ahead and refresh our browser, and notice we have a destroy button. Let's inspect it, and that looks good. It's gonna basically post 2 orders, gonna have a value of 26. I believe that if I click this button, we're gonna get an error from our server because our server doesn't know what to do with a delete sent to /orders. So let's go back in our code snippet, and let's grab our delete orders button, excuse me, our delete orders endpoint, and then let's add this delete orders endpoint back to our server, resave that, and our server will restart. And now if I go back in my web browser, I'm going to refresh for serendipity, and if I click destroy order, our server should receive an order, our delete request, right, which is what happened if you notice down here. We received a delete, and we don't necessarily see all the information that was contained in the param. So let's go ahead and just print out our params. And just to make it a little bit clearer, let's print an asterisk 10 times. It'll help us look at our params object. Let's save that, and then let's just refresh our page for fun, and I'm going to click destroy order, and notice we received a delete to /orders, and these are the params, right? Order ID is 27, and we get the extra information of delete, which tells Sinatra to convert our, whoops, I don't know what I did there. I'm just going to restart the server. I pushed Control C to get out of whatever it was that I did. I dragged something in there, and that messed up the terminal. So anyways, here we are. We have our functioning Spriggly Wiggly with 2 models, our restaurants and our orders. There is a one-to-many relationship between orders and restaurants, that is which we defined in this code here. And we have created all the server endpoints, and we have built all the pages required to render, edit, and create our restaurant and order objects. Let's go ahead and just do a quick walkthrough one more time. Create a new restaurant. We'll call this the Cruffin House in the Tender Knob, the district that I live in San Francisco. We'll create that, and let's create 2 Cruffins, please. And no, I don't want 2 Cruffins. I want 2 croissants. Let's edit that. So we're good, and actually, no, I don't like the name Cruffin House. We'll call it the Croissant House. And that pretty much wraps up this session. That was an overview of how to implement server endpoints to create, read, update, and destroy records in a Ruby Sinatra database. We utilized HTTP get, post, put, and delete actions. We wrote some CSS, we wrote some forms, we interacted with our database. I am John Davison, the once and future founder of Startuplandia LLC. I hope this has been informative and clarifying. Have a great evening.